What if falling asleep meant falling in love, and never waking up meant living forever? Tonight, we enter the shadowed halls of an ancient library where forbidden books hold more than just words. They hold souls. This is the story of Elara Nightingale, a rare book restorer who thought the most dangerous thing in her quiet life was a paper cut, until she opened a grimoire that bound her soul to Kieran, the most feared Fey prince in the Dream Court. Every night, she's pulled deeper into his crystalline realm of impossible beauty and deadly temptation. Every morning, she wakes with his touch still burning on her skin and the terrifying knowledge that she has 6 nights left before she can never return to the waking world. But here's the twist that will shatter your heart. She's starting to wonder if being trapped forever in his arms would really be such a terrible fate. In the next hour, you'll witness a forbidden romance that plays out in dreams but bleeds into reality, battles fought with magic that can rewrite the very fabric of sleep itself, and a love so powerful it threatens to destroy the barriers between 2 worlds. You'll feel every stolen kiss in crystalline gardens, every desperate fight to stay awake, and every moment when the line between salvation and damnation becomes impossibly thin. If you're ready to lose yourself in a world where love is the most dangerous magic of all, where dreams are more real than waking life, and where sometimes the monster is exactly who you need to save you, hit subscribe, silence your phone, and let yourself fall into the story that will haunt your dreams tonight. Welcome to the Library of Dreams and Desire, where some books read you back. The storm had been raging for 3 hours when Elara Nightingale made the decision that would damn her soul forever. Lightning fractured the sky outside the Blackthorn Private Library, casting dancing shadows across walls lined with books that had witnessed centuries of secrets. She should have gone home, should have locked the ancient manuscript she'd been restoring safely away, and returned to her small apartment where the most dangerous thing was burnt coffee and overdue bills. Instead, she found herself running her fingers along the spine of something that shouldn't have existed, a grimoire hidden within the false binding of a 15th century prayer book, its leather warm to the touch despite the October cold. "Librum somnorum vinculorum," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. The Book of Dream Bonds. Her grandmother's warnings about their family's gift, their curse, of seeing beyond the veil echoed in her mind, but intellectual curiosity won over ancestral fear. Just 1 page, she told herself, her hands trembling as she opened the cover. The Latin words seemed to shimmer and dance in the candlelight, rearranging themselves into something her blood recognized even if her mind didn't understand. As she read aloud, her voice grew stronger, more confident, until the final phrase rolled off her tongue like a song she'd always known. "Animam, mim trado ut te liberem." I give my soul to set you free. The world exploded in golden fire that didn't burn, and a voice like velvet wrapped around steel whispered directly into her soul. "Finally, my dreaming bride has come to claim me." The book crumbled to ash in her hands, but not before she saw eyes like liquid starlight watching her from between the pages, beautiful and terrible and utterly, completely alive. What had she just awakened? And why did her soul feel like it was already reaching toward that voice, desperate to answer its call? Elara fought sleep for 6 hours, consuming coffee until her hands shook and her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. But exhaustion was a tide that couldn't be held back forever, and when unconsciousness finally claimed her, she fell not into ordinary dreams, but through layers of reality itself, tumbling through starlit void until she landed on marble floors that sang beneath her feet. The palace around her defied every law of physics and reason. Corridors that stretched into infinity, walls of black crystal that reflected not her image, but her deepest desires, gardens where roses bloomed in impossible shades of gold and silver. The air tasted of midnight and wild magic, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of her own heartbeat echoing through chambers built from crystallized dreams. "You're even more beautiful than I imagined, little Vidant." The voice materialized before the man, shadows coalescing into a figure that made her breath catch in her throat. Kieran stood before her like a fallen angel carved from moonlight and sin, silver hair that moved like liquid mercury, skin pale as winter morning, and those eyes, God, those eyes held the depth of eternity and the promise of damnation all at once. "This isn't real," she whispered, but even as she spoke the words, She felt the cool marble beneath her bare feet, smelled the intoxicating scent of night-blooming jasmine, and something darker, more primal. I'm dreaming. This is just a very vivid dream. His laugh was music and mockery combined as he moved closer, each step deliberately slow, predatory. Oh, sweet Elara. Dreams are the only reality that matters. Everything else is just distraction. He reached out as if to touch her face, but his hand stopped just short of her skin, trembling with barely contained longing. The binding prevents me from touching you yet, but each night it weakens. Each night you belong to me a little more completely. His eyes darkened, pupils dilating until they swallowed the silver. Tell me, little Vidant, when you wake tomorrow, will you be able to forget how much you want me to touch you right now? The palace shuddered around them, as creatures of living shadow began to pour from the walls, their hungry eyes fixed on Elara. But why did she find herself stepping closer to the dangerous Fey prince instead of running away? Elara woke gasping, her skin slick with sweat, and her heart racing as if she'd been running for her life. But it was the rose lying on her pillow that made her blood turn to ice. A perfect bloom of impossible golden petals that smelled exactly like the gardens in her dream. Her hands shook as she picked it up, feeling its solid weight, the slight prick of thorns against her skin. Dreams don't leave evidence, she thought desperately. Dreams don't leave gifts. She stumbled through her morning routine like a sleepwalker, her mind fractured between the mundane reality of coffee and toast and the visceral memory of silver eyes that had watched her with the hunger of a man who had been starving for centuries. The mirror showed her own reflection, but for just a moment, just one terrifying heartbeat, she could have sworn her brown eyes had flickered violet. The Blackthorn Library felt different in daylight, as if the shadows were deeper, more aware. Elara threw herself into research with the desperation of the drowning, pulling every book on dream magic, fey lore, and soul bonds that she could find. Most were dismissed by modern scholars as fantasy, but her grandmother's voice whispered in her memory. Our blood runs thin with the old magic, child, but it runs true. What others call myth, we call Tuesday. Bonds forged in dreamfire are permanent after 7 nights. She read aloud from a crumbling manuscript, her voice barely steady. The mortal anchor will find herself pulled deeper into the fey realm with each passing night until she can no longer return to waking life. 6 nights. She had 6 nights to find a way to break a magical bond with a creature who existed in a realm she could only access while unconscious. Her research was interrupted by the discovery of a leathered journal wedged behind a shelf of romance novels, the handwriting feminine and desperate. Day 4 of the binding. I can feel him calling to me even now, while awake. His touch in dreams feels more real than anything in this gray world. God forgive me, but I think I'm starting to love my captor. The final entry was dated 50 years ago, written in a hand that trembled with either fear or anticipation. Day 6. Tomorrow I choose, but perhaps I have already chosen, and just lack the courage to admit it. Who was this woman who had faced the same choice? And why did reading her words make Elara's heart race not with fear, but with something dangerously close to envy? The second night, Kieran was waiting for her in a garden where every flower sang with its own voice, harmonizing into a symphony that made her soul ache with beauty. He sat beside a fountain carved from what looked like captured moonbeams, his silver hair unbound and flowing over shoulders that belonged in Renaissance sculptures. This time, when she approached, she noticed the subtle signs of his restraint, the way his hands clenched into fists when she drew near, how his breathing quickened when she spoke his name. You researched me today, he said without turning around, amusement coloring his voice like honey. Found Isabella's journal, didn't you? Poor dear Isabella, who thought she could fight what we both know is inevitable. He finally looked at her, and the raw longing in his eyes made her knees weak. She lasted 6 nights before she stopped trying to wake up. How many will you last, I wonder? Why are you doing this to me? The question tore from her throat, carrying all her fear and confusion, and the terrible growing attraction she couldn't deny. What did I ever do to deserve this? For a moment, something almost human flickered across his perfect features. Pain so deep it seemed to echo from his very core. Deserve? He stood with fluid grace, moving close enough that she could feel the cool energy radiating from his skin. Sweet Elara, you freed me from a prison that had held me for over a century. You gave me hope when I had forgotten what it felt like. And now, his voice dropped to a whisper that seemed to caress her skin. Now you're going to save me, whether you mean to or not. She wanted to step back, to run, to wake up and never sleep again. Instead, she found herself asking, "Save you from what?" From being the monster they made me. His confession was barely audible, but it hit her like a physical blow. The dream court. They turned me into something that feeds on mortal dreams, mortal life force. But you, little Vidant, you're different. Your energy doesn't drain away. It resonates with mine. With you as my anchor, I can remember what it felt like to be not good, perhaps, but not entirely damned. The garden began to shift around them, walls rising from the ground, to form an intimate bower where night-blooming jasmine climbed toward stars that pulsed with their own heartbeat. One touch, Elara. That's all I'm asking for. One touch to seal the bond that's already forming whether you fight it or not. Let me show you what forever could feel like. His hand extended toward hers, and she could see her reflection in his silver eyes, could see herself reaching out despite every rational thought screaming at her to resist. What would happen when their skin finally met? And why was she more terrified of wanting it than of the consequences? Time seemed suspended in crystalline amber as Elara stared at Kieran's outstretched hand. Her entire existence balanced on the precipice of a choice that would echo through eternity. Every rational part of her mind screamed warnings. This was how Isabella had been lost, how countless others had surrendered their mortality to dream-drunk oblivion. But there was something in his eyes that wasn't predatory hunger or calculated manipulation. There was fear, raw, vulnerable terror that she would reject him, leave him alone in his crystalline prison. "You're afraid," she whispered, the realization hitting her like lightning. "You're just as afraid as I am." His perfect composure cracked like ice in spring, and for a heartbeat she saw not the legendary Prince of Nightmares, but a man who had spent over a century believing himself unworthy of anything but fear and hatred. "Terrified," he admitted, his voice breaking on the word. "Terrified that you'll touch me and realize I'm exactly the monster they say I am. Terrified that you won't, and I'll spend another century knowing what I almost had." The honesty in his confession shattered something inside her chest, and before she could second-guess the decision, her fingers brushed against his palm. The contact sent shockwaves through both of them. Not pain, but recognition so profound. It felt like coming home after lifetimes of wandering. His skin was cool marble warming under her touch, and she could feel his pulse synchronizing with hers, their heartbeats finding the same desperate rhythm. "Elara," he breathed her name like a prayer, like a benediction, like the first word spoken in a new world. The garden exploded into impossible beauty around them, flowers blooming and fast-forward, fountains singing with voices of long-dead angels, the very air shimmering with magic that tasted of starlight and promises. "God, you feel like everything I've been missing." But even as euphoria flooded through her, she felt something else, a pulling sensation, as if invisible chains were wrapping around her soul, binding her not just to him, but to this realm of crystallized dreams. The binding was no longer forming. It was complete. She was his anchor now, connected to a creature of such power and darkness that the dream court had feared him enough to imprison him for over a century. "What have we done?" she whispered, but even as fear crept back into her voice, she didn't let go of his hand. Couldn't let go, even if she wanted to. The connection between them thrummed with life, with possibility, with a love that felt both ancient and newborn. The palace began to shake around them, and in the distance, she could hear the sound of hunting horns and the baying of creatures that had never known mercy. The dream court had felt the completed binding, and they were coming for both of them. But why did facing certain destruction while holding Kieran's hand feel safer than any moment she'd ever experienced in the waking world? The golden euphoria of their completed bond shattered like glass as the dream court's hunters materialized from the shadows, creatures that had never been mortal, beings of pure nightmare given form and purpose. They moved like liquid darkness given predatory intelligence, their eyes burning with the cold fire of distant stars. Kieran's grip on Elara's hand tightened as he pulled her behind him, his entire body shifting from lover to lethal protector in a heartbeat. "The shadow hounds," he growled, and she could hear centuries of hatred in those two words. "They're sent for those who break the court's laws, for those who dare to find love instead of feeding on fear. His free hand materialized a sword that looked forged from crystallized moonlight, its edge singing with barely contained power. "Stay behind me, little vident. What you're about to see is why they called me monster." The first creature lunged with inhuman speed, but Kieran was faster, liquid grace and deadly precision, as his blade carved through shadow flesh that screamed as it dissolved. But for every beast he destroyed, 2 more emerged from the darkness, and Elara realized with growing horror that they weren't just hunting Kieran. Their burning eyes fixed on her with equal hunger, recognizing her as the anchor that made his power complete. "They want me too," she whispered, understanding flooding through her as more pieces of this supernatural puzzle clicked into place. "I'm not just your anchor, I'm your weakness. As long as I exist, you can remember what it feels like to love instead of consume." "Never a weakness," Kieran snarled, spinning to decapitate a beast that had flanked them. "You're my strength, my redemption." But she could see the truth he wouldn't speak. Every moment he spent protecting her was a moment he couldn't fight at full capacity. Every second he held back his true, terrible power to keep from accidentally harming her was a second closer to their destruction. The palace around them began to collapse, reality warping as the Shadowhound's presence poisoned the dream realm Kieran had created for her. Crystalline walls cracked and bled darkness, and the singing fountains grew silent as their magic was devoured by creatures that existed to destroy love, hope, and every emotion that made existence bearable. "There's another way," Elara said suddenly, her grandmother's stories rushing back with crystal clarity. "The old magic, the vident blood. I can anchor you to the mortal realm instead of letting you be pulled back to the court." She could feel the truth of it singing in her bones, the power that had been sleeping in her bloodline finally awakening. "But Kieran, if I do this, if I pull you fully into the mortal world, you'll be human, mortal. You'll age, you'll die, you'll lose everything that makes you Fae." His sword never stopped moving as he carved through their attackers, but she saw his shoulders tense at her words. Would he choose mortality and love over immortal power? And could she live with herself if her attempt to save him stripped away everything he was? The Shadowhounds pressed closer, their circle tightening like a noose. But something fundamental had shifted in the air around Elara. Power that had been dormant in her blood for 26 years suddenly roared to life, responding to her desperation and the completed bond with Kieran. Her eyes blazed violet, not the pale hint she'd glimpsed in mirrors, but brilliant amethyst fire that made the creatures hiss and recoil. "Impossible," breathed a new voice, cold and terrible as winter morning. The Shadowhounds parted like a dark sea as their mistress materialized, Queen Morrigan of the Dream Court, beautiful as a blade and twice as deadly. Her silver hair flowed like liquid starlight, and her eyes held the depth of eternity and the cruelty of absolute power. "An arch-vident. I thought we had eliminated that bloodline centuries ago." "Not eliminated," Elara said, and her voice carried harmonics that hadn't been there moments before, undertones of power that made the dream realm itself listen. Hidden, protected, waiting. Understanding flooded through her as genetic memories awakened, showing her flashes of ancestors who had walked between worlds, who had shaped reality with will alone. "You didn't just imprison Kieran for refusing to feed on mortals. You imprisoned him because he found the last arch-vident bloodline, and you knew what we could become together." Queen Morrigan's perfect features twisted with something that might have been fear, before settling back into glacial composure. "What you could become," she corrected, "is irrelevant, because you're going to die here, little Vident, along with my wayward son." "Your son?" Elara's concentration wavered, and she felt Kieran's presence in her mind, not invading, but offering, sharing memories that made her gasp. Images flooded through her consciousness. A young Fae prince who had questioned the court's cruelty, who had refused order after order to drain human dreamers, who had been systematically broken and rebuilt, until only rebellion remained. "Mother Dearest has always had a talent for understatement," Kieran said grimly, his swordwork never slowing even as he spoke. "I wasn't just imprisoned for disobedience, love. I was tortured, twisted, turned into the very weapon she wanted, except I refused to aim where she pointed." The revelation hit Elara like a physical blow, but it also crystallized her resolve. This wasn't just about saving the man she was falling in love with. This was about breaking a cycle of abuse and control that had poisoned the dream court for millennia. Her power flared brighter, and she felt reality bending around her will. "You want to know what an Archvident can do?" she asked Queen Morrigan, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "We don't just anchor Fae to the mortal realm, we rewrite the rules entirely." She reached out with senses she was only beginning to understand, feeling the structure of the dream realm like a vast web she could reshape. "And I'm about to give your son exactly what he's always deserved. A choice." The air around them began to fracture like a broken mirror, showing glimpses of the mortal world bleeding through. But Queen Morrigan's laugh was like breaking glass, promising that whatever Elara was planning, the cost would be higher than she could imagine. What price would the magic demand for rewriting the fundamental laws of two realms? Queen Morrigan's laughter died as she realized that Elara wasn't bluffing. The Archvident power flowing through her was reshaping the dream realm in real time, creating fractures between worlds that shouldn't exist. But instead of fear, the Queen's expression shifted to something far more dangerous: satisfaction. "Oh, my dear child," she purred, her voice dripping with false maternal affection. "You're doing exactly what I hoped you would." She gestured, and the Shadowhounds backed away, forming a watching circle rather than continuing their attack. "Did you really think this was all coincidence? That you just happened to find that particular grimoire, in that particular library, on that particular storm-swept night?" Elara felt ice crystallize in her veins as the Queen continued, her smile sharp enough to cut souls. "I've been watching the Archvident bloodline for 3 centuries, waiting for one strong enough to do what you're doing right now. Isabella was too weak. She chose love over power and faded away. But you," her eyes glittered with triumph, "you're strong enough to tear holes between the realms, strong enough to let the entire dream court spill into your mortal world, where we can feed on billions of dreamers instead of the few who stumble into our realm." "No." Kieran's voice was barely human, distorted by rage and betrayal so profound it shook the foundation of the dream palace. "You orchestrated all of this. Every moment of my imprisonment, every year of torture, was to create this moment." His sword blazed brighter, but Elara could feel his anguish through their bond, the devastating realization that even his rebellion had been manipulated. "Of course, darling boy," Queen Morrigan replied with maternal condescension. "Did you think your precious mortal found you by accident? I made sure that grimoire ended up exactly where an Archvident would find it. I made sure she would fall in love with you just deeply enough to risk everything for your freedom." Her gaze shifted to Elara, cruel amusement dancing in her ancient eyes. "Tell me, sweet child, does it hurt to realize that every feeling you have for him might be artificial? That your true love might just be the echo of a spell I cast decades ago?" The words hit Elara like physical blows, doubt poisoning the certainty she'd felt moments before. Were her feelings real? Was the overwhelming connection she felt to Kieran genuine, or just elaborate manipulation by a creature with centuries of experience in twisting mortal hearts? "Don't listen to her," Kieran said desperately, but she could hear the doubt creeping into his voice too. "What we have is real, Elara. It has to be real." But Queen Morrigan wasn't finished. "The beautiful part is that it doesn't matter anymore. Real or artificial, your bond is complete. And now, my dear Archvident, you're going to finish what you started. You're going to tear open the barriers between worlds, and you're going to do it willingly, because the alternative is watching everyone you've ever cared about die screaming." Images flashed around them. Elara's small apartment, her colleagues at the library, innocent people going about their mundane lives with no idea that their dreams were about to become hunting grounds. The Queen's message was clear: cooperate, or watch the mortal world burn. Elara's power still crackled around her, reality still bent to her will, but now every option felt like damnation. Save the man she loved and doom her world, or sacrifice their love to protect billions of innocents? And how could she trust any emotion when the architect of this nightmare claimed to have orchestrated every beat of her heart? The silence stretched like a blade between heartbeats as Elara stood frozen in the epicenter of her own power, feeling the fractures between worlds pulse with each breath she took. Every fiber of her being screamed to trust what she felt for Kieran. But Queen Morrigan's words had planted seeds of doubt that grew like poisonous flowers in her mind. How could she distinguish between genuine love and magical manipulation, when her entire reality had been shaped by forces beyond her understanding. "I can feel your doubt," Kieran whispered, and the raw pain in his voice made her chest constrict. Through their bond, she felt his emotions as clearly as her own. The devastating fear that everything beautiful between them might be built on lies. The self-loathing that whispered he was exactly the monster his mother had always said he was. God, Elara, what if she's right? What if I've been nothing but her weapon this entire time and I was too blind to see it? Stop. The word tore from her throat with enough force to shake the fractured dream realm around them. Just stop. She pressed her palms against her temples, trying to sort through the chaos of emotion and memory flooding through their connection. But instead of confusion, she found something else. Moments of pure, unguarded truth that no spell could fabricate. "The grimoire didn't make me capable of love," she said slowly, her voice growing stronger with each word. "It couldn't create emotions I'd never felt. Couldn't manufacture dreams I'd never dared to have. Yes, you manipulated the circumstances," she addressed Queen Morrigan directly. "But you couldn't manipulate my heart. That was always mine to give." She turned to Kieran, and when their eyes met, she saw not the legendary Prince of Nightmares, but the man who had trembled with fear at her touch, who had chosen exile over becoming a monster, who had spent a century in magical prison rather than harm innocent dreamers. "And you, God, Kieran, don't you see? If you were really her weapon, you would have fed on me the moment we touched. Instead, you've given me power, shared your strength, made me stronger than I ever thought possible." Queen Morrigan's confident smile began to waver as she realized her psychological warfare was backfiring. "Touching," she said, but there was an edge to her voice now. "But sentiment won't change the reality of your situation. The barriers are weakening whether you choose to embrace it or not. Soon, the choice will be taken from you entirely." But Elara was no longer listening to the Queen's threats. Through her archvident senses, she could feel the true structure of the magic binding them all together. Not just her bond with Kieran, but the ancient spells that held the Dream Court's power, the barriers between worlds, the very foundations of Queen Morrigan's reign. And in that vast web of interconnected magic, she found something the Queen had missed, a single thread that could unravel everything. "You're right about one thing," Elara said, her power beginning to coalesce in ways that made the dream realm sing with anticipation. "The choice is about to be taken away, but not from me." Her eyes blazed violet fire as understanding crystallized into purpose. "From you." The air around them began to shimmer with possibility as Elara reached for magic that had been sleeping in her bloodline for centuries. But what she was about to attempt had never been done before, and failure would mean more than death. It would mean the corruption of love itself across two worlds. Could she trust in a bond that might be artificial to save everything she held dear? The moment Elara reached for the deepest layers of her archvident heritage, the dream realm around them began to sing. Not with voices, but with the harmonic resonance of magic recognizing its rightful wielder. Power that had been constrained by bloodline and circumstance for generations flowed through her like liquid starlight, and she finally understood why Queen Morrigan had feared her lineage enough to hunt it to near extinction. "Archvidents don't just anchor Fae to the mortal realm," she whispered, her voice carrying undertones that made reality listen. "We rewrite the fundamental laws that govern both worlds." Her consciousness expanded beyond the confines of flesh and dream, touching the golden threads that connected every living thing across the dimensional divide. And there, woven through the tapestry of existence like a cancer, she found the source of the Dream Court's corruption. The original binding, not Kieran's imprisonment, but something far older. A spell cast millennia ago that had twisted the natural symbiosis between Fae and mortals into a predatory relationship, turning dream sharing into dream feeding, mutual benefit into parasitic consumption. Queen Morrigan hadn't just orchestrated recent events. She had corrupted the fundamental nature of Fae-mortal interaction since the dawn of civilization. "You see it now, don't you?" Queen Morrigan's voice had lost its mocking tone, replaced by something that might have been respect or fear. "The binding that made us what we are. But you cannot unmake what has stood for 10,000 years without consequences. Little Vedant, destroy that spell, and you destroy the separation between dreams and waking reality. Every nightmare that has ever existed will bleed into your world, Every dark fantasy will become manifest terror. Not every nightmare, Elara replied, her power reaching deeper into the magical substrate that connected all things. Just yours. She could feel Kieran beside her, his strength flowing into her through their bond, amplifying her abilities beyond what any single being could achieve. Together, they were something new. Not fae, not mortal, but a bridge between worlds that could reshape both. The spell she began to weave was unprecedented in its complexity. Instead of simply breaking Queen Morrigan's ancient binding, she was rewriting it, transforming the parasitic magic into something symbiotic, something that would allow fae and mortals to share dreams and power without domination or consumption. It was magic that required perfect balance, absolute trust, and a love profound enough to anchor two souls across the dimensional divide. "This is what you feared," Kieran said, his voice filled with wonder as he felt the transformation beginning. "Not that I would find an archvident to free me, but that we would find each other and become something you could never control." The dream realm convulsed as 10 millennia of corrupted magic began to unravel. Shadow hounds dissolved back into ordinary darkness. The crystalline palace softened into something warm and alive, and Queen Morrigan herself began to change, her terrible beauty becoming less sharp, more human, as the power that had sustained her for eons shifted into new configurations. "You don't understand what you're doing," the queen gasped, but her voice no longer carried the weight of absolute authority. "Without the separation, without the hierarchy, how will any of us know who we are? We'll figure it out together," Elara said simply, her magic reaching its crescendo, the way it should have been from the beginning. The transformation was almost complete, but she could feel the immense strain on her mortal form. Rewriting the fundamental nature of two worlds was beyond what any single being was meant to survive. Would their love be strong enough to anchor them both through the impossible transition ahead? The moment Elara's spell reached critical mass, the agony began. Rewriting the fundamental nature of two worlds wasn't just magic. It was cosmic surgery performed on the living fabric of existence, and her mortal body was paying the price. Blood ran from her eyes like crimson tears. Her hands trembled with power that threatened to tear her apart from within, and through their bond she felt Kieran's desperate terror as he realized what this was costing her. "Stop," he begged, his arms wrapping around her as she swayed on her feet. "Elara, you're killing yourself. Let me carry more of the burden. I'm immortal. I can survive this." "Not anymore," she whispered, and he could hear the smile in her voice even through the pain. "That's the point, love. We're both becoming something new." Through the haze of transformation, she could see the changes beginning in him too, his ethereal fae perfection softening into something more human, more real, more beautifully mortal. "We're choosing mortality together, choosing a life that has limits and meaning," and her words cut off as another wave of magical backlash tore through her. But this time she wasn't alone in bearing it. Queen Morrigan, her power diminishing with each passing second, stepped forward with an expression Elara had never expected to see on that perfect face: maternal concern. "She's right," the former queen said quietly, her voice stripped of its supernatural authority. "The spell is too vast for any single consciousness to control, but 3 minds, working in harmony." She looked directly at Kieran, and for the first time, Elara saw not a manipulative tyrant, but a mother watching her child face an impossible choice. "I may have orchestrated the circumstances, but I never anticipated this outcome. You were always supposed to be my weapon, Kieran, but instead you became something I never thought possible. Genuinely good." "Mother," Kieran's voice broke on the word, centuries of pain and betrayal warring with an even deeper need for reconciliation. "Why? Why the torture? The manipulation? Because I was terrified," Queen Morrigan admitted, her confession shattering the last walls between them. "Terrified that if I showed you love, you would become weak. Terrified that if I admitted I was wrong about the binding, about feeding on mortals, I would have to face the enormity of what I had done." Her hands joined theirs in the magical working, her power flowing into the spell that was remaking both their worlds. "Let me help you finish this. Let me finally be the mother you deserved." The 3 of them, former queen, banished prince, and mortal archvident, became a conduit for transformation that rippled across dimensions. The dream court dissolved and reformed into something unprecedented, a realm where fae and mortals could meet as equals, where dreams became shared experiences rather than feeding grounds, where love could flourish without domination or fear. But the magic demanded its price. As the transformation neared completion, Elara felt her consciousness beginning to fragment, spreading across too many dimensions to maintain coherent identity. She was becoming part of the bridge between worlds, losing herself in the vast network of connection she had created. "I can't hold on," she gasped, feeling her sense of self scatter like leaves in a hurricane. "The magic. It's too much. I'm losing myself in it." Kieran's grip on her tightened, his love blazing through their bond like an anchor in the storm of transformation. But would even their love be enough to keep her soul intact when she had just rewoven the fabric of existence itself? And what would remain of the woman he had fallen in love with when the cosmic forces finished reshaping her? As Elara's consciousness began to dissolve into the vast network of magic she had created, Kieran did something that would have been impossible under the old laws. He followed her. Their bond, strengthened by choice rather than compulsion, became a lifeline that let him dive into the chaotic swirl of her fragmenting awareness. In that space between dimensions, where thought and reality blurred together, he found her scattered pieces and began pulling them back together through sheer force of will and love. "I'm here," he whispered directly into her dissolving mind, his mental voice cutting through the cosmic chaos like a blade of pure intention. "I'm here, and I'm not letting you go. Not to magic, not to duty, not to anything." Around them, the transformation continued, worlds reshaping themselves, ancient laws rewriting, millions of souls suddenly finding themselves connected in ways they had never imagined possible. In her fragmented state, Elara could perceive the full scope of what they had accomplished. The nightmare realm of the corrupted dream court was becoming something beautiful, a space where mortals and fae could meet in perfect balance, where dreams were shared rather than stolen, where love could flourish without parasitism or control. But the beauty of it was overwhelming her mortal consciousness, pulling her awareness in directions that human minds weren't meant to stretch. "Too much," she managed to communicate through their bond, her sense of self scattering like stars across an infinite sky. "I can see everything, feel everything, every dream, every hope, every connection across both worlds. I'm becoming part of the magic itself." That was when Queen Morrigan did something that surprised them both. Instead of trying to seize control or manipulate the situation, she poured her own fading power into stabilizing Elara's consciousness, using centuries of magical knowledge to help contain the arch-vident abilities that threatened to consume her completely. "Focus on his voice," the former queen instructed, her mental touch surprisingly gentle. "Let everything else fade except the bond between you. Love is the only force in existence that can define boundaries within infinity." Her presence wrapped around Elara's scattered awareness like a protective shell. "I may have orchestrated your meeting, child, but what you built together transcends any manipulation. Hold on to that truth." Slowly, agonizingly, Elara felt herself coalescing back into something resembling individual consciousness. The cosmic awareness remained. She would always be able to sense the connections between worlds, feel the flow of dreams and magic. But Kieran's love gave her an anchor point, a center from which to experience infinite possibility without losing herself completely. "There you are," he breathed, as her eyes focused on his face again, violet fire dimming to merely extraordinary instead of world-shaking. "God, Elara, I thought I'd lost you to the magic." "Never," she whispered, her voice hoarse from channeling power beyond mortal limits. "As long as you love me, I'll always find my way back." She looked around at the transformed realm surrounding them, no longer the crystalline palace of dreams, but something warmer, more alive, where mortal and fae architecture blended in perfect harmony. "We did it. We actually changed everything." But even as they celebrated their victory, Elara could feel something pulling at the edges of her awareness, a summons from the mortal world, where dawn was breaking, and her physical body lay unconscious in her small apartment. The transformation was complete, but now came the real test. Could their love survive the transition from dream to waking reality? The realm around them began to fade as morning light called her home. But this time, the dissolution felt different. Not like waking from a dream, but like stepping from one room into another. Would Kieran be able to follow her into the mortal world? And what would they find waiting for them in a reality forever changed by their love? Elara's eyes opened not in her small apartment, but in a space that existed between dreaming and waking, a liminal realm where the transformed magic had created something unprecedented. She lay in her own bed, but the room shimmered with subtle impossibilities, shadows that moved with liquid grace, air that hummed with barely audible music, and beside her, solid and real and wonderfully mortal, Kieran slept with his silver hair spread across her pillow. It worked, she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. Through the window, she could see her familiar street, but there were differences that spoke to the fundamental changes they had wrought. Dreams leaked gently into reality, not as nightmares or invasive fantasies, but as touches of wonder that made the ordinary world more beautiful. A child's imaginary dragon cast rainbow shadows on the sidewalk. An elderly woman's garden bloomed with flowers that existed only in memory, but somehow grew real through the power of love and longing. Kieran stirred beside her, and when he opened his eyes, they were no longer the liquid silver of immortal fae, but something warmer, still supernatural, but anchored in humanity. "Good morning, love," he said, his voice carrying just a hint of the otherworldly music that had once defined him. "How does it feel to wake up in the world you remade?" "Terrifying," she admitted, sitting up and marveling at the fact that she felt entirely herself, despite having channeled cosmic forces just hours before. What if we got something wrong? What if people can't handle this much magic bleeding into everyday life? But even as she spoke, her enhanced senses were picking up the emotional resonance of the city around them. Instead of chaos or fear, she felt wonder, joy, and a deep sense of connection that humanity had been unconsciously craving for millennia. People were sharing dreams without knowing it, finding comfort in the gentle presence of benevolent magic, discovering that reality could be both grounded and transcendent. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Aldrich at the library. "Elara, something extraordinary happened last night. The entire collection has transformed. Manuscripts are revealing hidden texts. Ancient languages are translating themselves, and everyone who enters reports having the most beautiful dreams. What did you do?" "We gave the world back its magic," Kieran said softly, reading over her shoulder. "The real question is, what do we do now? The old structures are gone. The dream court as it existed has dissolved. We've created something entirely new." Standing up, Elara moved to the window and looked out at the transformed world. In the distance, she could see others like them, mortals who had found their fae partners, beings who had chosen to bridge the gap between worlds rather than maintaining the ancient separation. Some were couples walking hand in hand, their combined auras creating small pockets of shared reality. Others were individuals who glowed with the soft light of those who had learned to dream while awake. "We learned together," she said finally, turning back to face the man who had chosen mortality for love, who had sacrificed immortal power for the chance to build something real with her. "We help others navigate this new world. We make sure that the balance we created actually serves everyone, not just those with power." Queen Morrigan's voice drifted through the room, not invasive, but present, like a distant memory of music. "The Archvident bloodline was always meant to be teachers and guides, not rulers. You have that chance now, both of you." The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating a world forever changed by love's refusal to accept impossible limitations. But as Elara and Kieran prepared to step into their new roles as bridges between worlds, the real adventure was just beginning. How would they help humanity and the Fae learn to coexist in harmony? And what challenges awaited in a reality where dreams could become truth? The Blackthorn Library had become something unprecedented, part research facility, part sanctuary, part training ground for those learning to navigate the new reality where dreams and waking life intertwined. Elara stood before a diverse group of students, mortals discovering latent magical abilities, Fae learning to exist without the parasitic relationship that had defined them for millennia, and the new hybrid beings like herself and Kieran, who served as bridges between worlds. "The most important thing to remember," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had fundamentally reshaped existence, "is that magic without love becomes corruption. We've seen what happens when power is used to dominate rather than connect." Her eyes found Kieran, who was working with a young Fae learning to form consensual dream bonds rather than feeding on unwilling mortals. "But magic with love, that can transform everything." A hand raised in the back. "Marcus," a former Dream Court noble who had chosen redemption over exile when the old system collapsed. What about those who resist the changes? Not everyone has embraced this new harmony. Some of the older Fae still try to feed in the traditional ways. Kieran looked up from his student, his expression growing serious. "That's why we're here," he said, moving to stand beside Elara in the unconscious partnership that had become second nature to them. The transformation created new possibilities, but it didn't eliminate free will. Some will choose the old ways, the destructive patterns. It's our responsibility as guardians to intervene when necessary. The title had emerged organically, guardian, not rulers or judges, but protectors and teachers who helped maintain the delicate balance they had created. There were others like them around the world, pairs and individuals who had taken on the responsibility of shepherding this new age of magical coexistence. Speaking of which, Dr. Aldrich interrupted from the doorway, his expression troubled. "We have a situation in Prague. Something is feeding on dreamers there, leaving them catatonic. The local authorities are baffled." Elara felt her enhanced senses reach out across the dimensional networks she had helped create, touching the disturbance Aldrich described. There, a knot of corrupted magic, a remnant of the old ways trying to reassert itself. "We'll leave tonight," she decided, then looked at her students. "This is what the work looks like. Not always grand gestures and world-changing magic, but the quiet, constant effort of choosing love over power, connection over domination, every single day." After the class dispersed, Elara and Kieran walked through the transformed library, past shelves where books whispered secrets to those ready to hear them, where ancient texts revealed new layers of meaning to eyes that had learned to see beyond the mundane. The afternoon sun slanted through windows that sometimes showed not just the street outside, but glimpses of the dream realm where they had first fallen in love. "Any regrets?" Kieran asked, the question they had returned to periodically in the months since the transformation. "About giving up your quiet life? About binding yourself to an ex-Fae prince with a complicated family history?" Elara laughed, the sound bright with genuine joy. "Are you kidding? I spent 26 years thinking I was just a book restorer with weird dreams and a talent for finding hidden texts. Now I know I'm the descendant of reality shapers, bound to the love of my life, and responsible for helping guide the magical evolution of two worlds." She took his hand, marveling as always at how right it felt. "If anything, I regret all those years I spent thinking small." They paused before a new addition to the library, a memorial wall where Isabella's portrait hung alongside those of other souls lost to the old ways, the corrupted magic that had turned love into consumption. Below her picture, an inscription read, "She dreamed of a better world but couldn't imagine she deserved to live in it. May we honor her memory by choosing both love and life." "She would have loved this," Kieran said softly, his voice carrying the weight of old grief transformed into purpose, seeing the dream court become something healing instead of hungry. As evening approached and they prepared for their journey to Prague, Elara felt the vast network of connections she had helped create humming with life across the globe. Every choice made from love instead of fear strengthened the new reality they had built. But challenges remained, and some battles still lay ahead. What would they find in Prague? And how would they help others learn to choose light over shadow, in a world where both were more powerful than ever before? The anniversary arrived not with fanfare but with the quiet satisfaction of work well done. Elara woke in their shared home, a space that existed partially in the mortal realm, partially in the dream dimension, completely in love, to find Kieran already up, making coffee with the casual magic that had become second nature to him. Sunlight streamed through windows that showed different views depending on the observer's needs, sometimes the bustling street outside, sometimes the crystal gardens where they had first touched, always beautiful. "Good morning, guardian nightingale," he said with a smile that still made her heart skip beats even after a year of waking up beside him. "Ready for another day of saving the world through aggressive compassion and excellent coffee?" "Guardian Nightbane," she corrected with mock severity, having taken his name in the small ceremony they had held 6 months prior, witnessed by reformed Fae, awakened mortals, and one very proud former queen who had become their most trusted advisor. And yes, always ready. What's on the agenda? Their work had evolved far beyond crisis intervention. The Prague incident had led to establishing guardian outposts across the globe, training centers where new magical beings learned to channel power through love rather than domination. They had developed protocols for identifying and rehabilitating corrupted magic, created support networks for humans adapting to enhanced dream lives, and written the foundational texts for what historians were already calling the Second Age of Magic. 3 new applications for Guardian training, Kieran reported, settling beside her with their morning coffee. His dark, with hints of otherworldly spices, hers light with cream that swirled in patterns that sometimes spelled out love notes. A telepathic pair from Tokyo, a dreamweaver from Sao Paulo, and someone very interesting from right here in the city. A 12-year-old who's apparently been teaching her stuffed animals to come alive. Children adapt so quickly, Elara mused, thinking of all the young people who had embraced the new reality with the fearless curiosity that adults often struggled to maintain. Sometimes I think they're the real guardians. We're just keeping things stable until they're old enough to show us what comes next. Their conversation was interrupted by a familiar presence, not Queen Morrigan, who had chosen to spend her remaining years teaching others about the dangers of power without love, but Isabella. The woman whose journal had first warned Elara about the binding's dangers had found peace in the transformed dream realm, occasionally visiting to offer guidance to new couples navigating fey-mortal relationships. The young dreamweaver in Sao Paulo. Isabella's voice drifted through their shared awareness, warm with the contentment of someone who had finally found her happy ending. Even after death, she's not just weaving dreams. She's creating new forms of art that exist only in the space between sleeping and waking. You should see what she's building. Galleries where people can walk through their own subconscious. We'll visit next week, Elara decided. After we finish the new training protocols and check on the situation in... Kieran's finger on her lips interrupted the growing to-do list. Today is our anniversary, he said firmly. The day you opened a book and changed everything. The day we chose each other across impossible odds. Today we celebrate and tomorrow we save the world. She looked into his eyes, still silver, still otherworldly, but now anchored in a mortality they had chosen together, and felt the same rush of recognition and longing that had defined their first touch. You're right. Today we remember what all of this is really about. They spent the day revisiting the places that had shaped their story. The library where they had first connected, now bustling with activity as one of the world's premier centers for magical research. The street where Elara had lived when she was just a book restorer with strange dreams. The small cafe where they had shared their first meal in the mortal world, still giddy with the impossibility of Kieran existing in daylight. As evening fell, they found themselves back in the dream realm. Not by accident or magical compulsion, but by choice, stepping consciously into the space they had transformed from prison into paradise. The crystalline palace was gone, replaced by something that shifted and changed with their moods and needs. Tonight, it was a simple cottage garden where roses bloomed in impossible colors, and the air hummed with the contented dreams of lovers across both worlds. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't opened that book? Kieran asked as they walked among flowers that sang lullabies to sleeping children. Every day, Elara admitted. I would have lived a perfectly ordinary life, probably married someone nice and boring, maybe had children who never knew they carried magic in their blood. She paused beside a fountain where the water showed glimpses of alternate realities, versions of themselves who had never met, worlds where the old corruption still held sway. But then I remember, every choice we didn't make, every path we didn't take, led to this moment. I wouldn't trade this reality for any other. Above them, the sky showed not stars, but the gentle glow of millions of dreams being shared across the dimensional divide. Each connection a small victory over the isolation and fear that had once defined mortal fae relationships. Their love had been the catalyst, but the real magic belonged to everyone brave enough to choose connection over separation, trust over fear. So what comes next? Kieran wondered aloud, pulling her close as they watched new constellations of shared dreams being born. Everything, Elara said simply. Everything beautiful, everything challenging, everything worth fighting for. She looked up at him, this man who had chosen mortality for love, who had transformed from prisoner to prince to something entirely new. We keep growing, keep learning, keep choosing each other every single day, and we help others do the same. As the night deepened around them, and dreams began to flow between worlds like rivers of liquid starlight, Elara and Kieran settled into the perfect contentment of a story that had found its happy ending, not as a conclusion, but as a beginning. In the distance, they could hear the laughter of other couples, other guardians, other souls brave enough to love across impossible divides. The Library of Dreams and Desire had given them each other, but what they built together would ripple through reality for generations to come. Some love stories end with a kiss. Theirs ended with the promise to keep choosing love, every day, for all the days and dreams yet to come. Years would pass, and decades, and still their love would grow deeper, richer, more complex. Other couples would follow their example. Other guardians would take up the mantle of protecting the delicate balance between worlds. Children would be born who could dream while awake and love without fear. Artists would create beauty that existed in multiple dimensions, and the world would slowly, surely, become more magical and more human all at once. And in a library that existed partially in every dreamer's heart, a single book would rest on its shelf, not the grimoire that had started it all, which had crumbled to ash and fulfillment, but a new volume, written by love itself. On its cover, simple words, "The Library of Dreams and Desire, where every story begins." For those brave enough to open it, the book would tell their story, but more than that, it would help them write their own. After all, the most powerful magic has always been the courage to love someone completely, despite every reason to fear. And that magic belongs to everyone willing to claim it. Thank you for dreaming with us tonight. Until our dreams cross paths again, sleep well, love deeply, and remember, in the space between heartbeats, anything is possible.